So Margaret, starting with you on kind of our third and penultimate point, there might be people who are watching this, there will be people who watch this, who are thinking of starting their own social movement. It might be to do with avoidable health inequalities where they are. It might be to do with young people. There's a lot of interest in the future generations work that's happening in Wales as well, and people want to mobilise around that. What advice would you give anybody watching this who's thinking of doing that? What would be the one or two pieces of advice that you'd give to them?
Find allies that you can trust and go on the journey with, because no one person or even small group of people can do this. So you have to find people who have got that common purpose. And I think I was lucky that I already had some of those people around me, and many more who were waiting to be asked to join. And again, that strength that is there in having frontline practitioners who are maybe relatively new in their career, working alongside people that, you know, sort of in our cases were at the peak of their career or coming towards it. So trying to be polite there, but more mature people who have seen some of, you know, some of this working the first time round and can say, well, you know, that did or didn't work. So that mix is very powerful. And not underestimating how people will want to stop you, because this is so powerful.
Yeah.
Not because they're bad people, but I think because they really do feel threatened by it. Maybe they don't understand it. They've not been exposed to some of that different way of thinking around leadership, or how you can combine research with actual practical work on the ground. But it is possible. I think the other thing is, don't bite off more than you can chew in the early days. One of the things I think we learned was that we had a very loose way of organising ourselves in the first year. So we spent a lot of time, as well as it being the right thing to do in terms of thinking about outcomes and purpose and how the style of leadership, a lot of time revisiting the previous meeting, because we'd have a completely different group of people at every meeting. And it was a bit like one of the 1970s women aid collectives where, you know, you just try to make collective decisions. Well, it really doesn't work. But what we did do was come up with a really positive light touch form of governance that enabled work to happen and gave more focus to doing than meeting for the sake of it. So I think the governance does need to happen. And once I think the governance was in the right place, some of those organisations and individuals who'd felt a bit wary of what that lot were doing opened up to us and were able to invest time, reputation, as they would have seen it, their credibility if this new thing went horribly wrong. It made it easier to have some of those conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you, Margaret.
I think the other thing would be around what you do and letting people discover their own passion and have their head in a way and get on and do.
Yeah, give them a chance to go. I think the other thing, just before I pass over to Claire, I think that all of that approach built, and we can, you know, you can look at it afterwards, but it built trust, and then from that proper relationships developed. And I think that's one of the things I think that is still really strong about 2025 to this day. But that governance transition is a very important point, and one probably I've not really thought about again until you mentioned it. I'd forgotten those revolving meetings. So that's a really important point. Claire, anything you'd like to add? Advice to us?
Yeah, it was just, I think it plays back to the conversation a few minutes ago about getting a clear purpose, because it's the purpose that's brought people together because they want to do something, and that's what's kept people going. And I remember an interesting conversation I had with the leader of Flintshire Council when we were a couple of years in, and it was after we'd managed to have Vaughan Gething come and speak at an event. And he said to me, I wondered a lot, he said, about what you're doing there and who's giving you permission and where it fits in the local authority and health board structures across North Wales and what the accountability is. But you said, I can see now that really we did just need to let people get on and do what they felt were the right things to do. And probably that if you'd come and asked permission, we would have killed it off. So I guess the other thing for me, and I suppose this is part of my character as well, sometimes it's good to ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So that's what I'd say to people who
To
are...
act. Thank you, Claire, that's lovely. Paul, finally, from you, advice?
Yeah, Claire, makes me feel like we were rebels with a cause.
We still are.
makes me feel slightly dangerous. I think if there was one piece of advice, I think it was a pearl of wisdom that came out of the work we did on systems leadership. And that is that in order to lead collaboratively, you have to leave your egos at the door. And let's face it, as organizational leaders, we're all guilty of thinking that we know best. We go into meetings knowing what solutions are before you have the discussion sometimes, and you have to be persuaded. And I think that again was another really brilliant concept of actually, this isn't about us. It's something I think maybe on the as we go on we can talk about later. The willingness to collaborate and being able to see what you can get from a group in that way. I think the USP, the unique selling point, if you like, for 2025 has also been about its engagement, involvement, commitment. One follows the other from those, and you could almost see that on the launch event that we had. We started with engaging people. We got their involvement. By the end of the day, they were committed, and I think that was a really worthwhile sort of journey. I think the other key thing that has to be said is facilitation, and I think Claire, Margaret, and myself recognising that we hadn't got time for this. None of us individually or even collectively were going to be able to find the time or the resources to implement this in the way that it needed doing. And I think, to our credit, I think we realised that we all felt this was sufficiently important that we needed to put some resource into it. And so we went off and found this bloke. What was his name? To
Whatever happened to him.
I know, yeah, to do the facilitation. But that was a really important move. And I think when we went back to our respective groups in local authorities, housing associations, the health board, people backed our judgment on that. And we got other people coming in, chipping in then to fund it. And I think probably each of us probably put in more than we perhaps should in terms of contribution, but we didn't mind because we were seeing progress, and we knew that I just always had this feeling that in my stomach that this was going to work and it was going to be different, and we were at last going to get somewhere. So crack on.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for saying that. And I think one of the things that we've all learned subsequently is that whichever way you look at it, this kind of leadership, and the way that Margaret and Claire have both described it, it's collective leadership, isn't it? And it's also a community. What you're doing is building a community of leaders, and that needs a kind of almost a community development worker. And I suppose that's kind of the role that I've played and that two will have played along that path, is because I think the other thing perhaps that we haven't talked about so much, and I think that's probably more reflective of the characters of the three of you, but we should probably emphasize, is that this is hard work and it requires a lot of stamina. So it isn't, neither of you were sitting there thinking, oh, I've got a couple of days free a week that I want to fill with doing a social movement. Everyone was really busy. And I think that probably builds on Margaret's point. You want willing and busy people, don't you? People who are working already very hard. And I think to keep that going and to maintain that movement, and now we're sort of 5 years in, it does require stamina. I think, those of you who know me know that I think that's kind of probably one of the most underrated leadership qualities generally, is that people who do well generally just stick at it, and I think that's, you know, that's an important part. And perhaps you do sometimes need someone who'll help chivvy that along in the background. I think that's quite important.